If you feel like bread costs more today than it did yesterday, you're not imagining it. South Africa in 2026 is facing some of the most jaw-dropping price increases we've seen in years, and we're breaking it all down for you. Please kindly watch, subscribe, like, comment, and share for more interesting news about South Africa. Cost of living in South Africa in 2026. A deep squeeze on households. South Africa's cost of living in 2026 remains a defining issue for individuals and policymakers alike. After years of economic pressures including high food and fuel prices, persistent unemployment, and slow wage growth, many households feel financially stretched as they enter the new year. While headline inflation has moderated from some very high levels seen in recent years, the effects of cumulative price rises continue to bite, especially for lower and middle-income citizens trying to make ends meet. Inflation and price growth. Although the Annual Consumer Price Index (CPI) showed inflation at moderate levels in 2025 and into 2026 around 2.8% year-on-year, according to the latest stats, this number masks ongoing increases in the cost of essentials. Essential grocery items, fuel, electricity, water, and transport costs have all risen over preceding years, meaning households still pay significantly more for these basics compared with a few years ago. For example, everyday items now cost around $1,808 more annually than a year ago based on typical household baskets. Food inflation remains significant, with basic food basket prices climbing sharply month to month, continuing to squeeze household budgets. Electricity tariffs and other utilities, key cost drivers, remain high, adding to monthly bills. This combination means that even moderate headline inflation doesn't capture the lived reality of households facing steady increases in essential expenses. Real impacts on households. Despite statistical declines in headline inflation, basic expenses continue to rise in real terms. Costs of living have outpaced wage growth for many South Africans, meaning that real disposable income, what's left after essential bills, continues. Food accounts for a substantial proportion of household spending in South Africa. For low-income families, food inflation far exceeds what wages have kept up with. Essential food inflation remains stubbornly high, with prices for staples like fruits, vegetables, oils, and proteins rising faster than overall inflation. For many rural and urban poor households, this means spending more than half of their net income on food and utilities alone. In some regions, essential food prices rose enough that families are forced to choose less nutritious diets or underspend on other needs like education or healthcare. Wages versus costs. A worsening gap. A central challenge for South Africans is that wages have not kept pace with inflation, particularly for low-income workers. A recent analysis showed that salary increases are often absorbed just by the rising costs of basic commodities, meaning many households only break even when receiving pay rises. Minimum wage reality. The national minimum wage in South Africa, about our 28.79 per hour, or roughly our $4,836 per month for a 21-day work period, still leaves workers below the upper-bound poverty line, particularly for families of four. When basic expenses like electricity, transport, and food are factored in, the gap between incomes and needs becomes stark. This wage-cost mismatch is reflected in everyday experiences. Many workers report that even doubling their salary over recent years hasn't changed their quality of life, because living costs have risen alongside. Young South Africans struggling with debt and schooling costs feel the squeeze as high food, transport, and rent prices compete with other financial obligations. Other cost drivers: electricity, transport, and housing. Utility bills. Electricity tariffs have been increasing, and recent mistakes in regulatory approvals sparked public backlash due to even higher projected costs. Municipal and national debates focus on whether these price hikes are necessary or merely exacerbating hardships. Fuel and transport costs are another major issue. Fuel price volatility and rising taxi fares have significantly increased commuting costs. Many households report that transport alone eats into a large share of their limited disposable income. Housing costs, whether rent or mortgage repayments, are a persistent concern, particularly in cities like Cape Town and Johannesburg where prices have climbed. Some residents note that rental costs are so high in urban centers that living comfortably becomes increasingly unaffordable. South African reactions: frustration, adaptation, and social stress. South Africans' responses to the ongoing cost of living crunch are varied but overwhelmingly marked by concern, frustration, and adaptation. These reactions are visible both in official opinion surveys and in grassroots social media discussions. Public sentiment and caution. A survey by Nielsen IQ shows that while around 64% of consumers expect their household situation to improve at the start of 2026, many are wary. A significant portion, about 37%, feels worse off than a year ago, pointing to the increased cost of living, job insecurity, and economic stagnation as key reasons. Social media voices. Across social platforms, many South Africans complain that despite higher salaries, the money doesn't stretch, and everyday bills seem to consume an ever larger portion of income. Posts from urban residents discuss the rising prices of food, rent, and utility costs, echoing a sense of economic anxiety that battles perceptions of slow government response. Viral online discussions. On social media, debates about possible inflation rises in 2026 reflect widespread fear that the cost of living crisis isn't over and could worsen. Many users responded with frustration and calls to prepare financially for a tougher year ahead. These reactions show how deeply economic issues penetrate daily life and public discourse in South Africa. Government and civil society responses. At the highest levels, South African authorities acknowledge these economic pressures. President Cyril Ramaphosa's 2026 New Year message explicitly recognized the burden of the high cost of living on many households and vowed to collaborate with business, labor, and civil society to address these challenges. Government of South Africa. Meanwhile, civil society organizations and political parties continue to raise concerns, with some labor and advocacy groups arguing that inflation and utility cost increases are unsustainable for ordinary workers. The Competition Commission's inaugural Cost of Living report also urged businesses in essential sectors, like food, transport, and energy, to be more transparent in pricing practices, highlighting how price increases are affecting everyday consumers. Looking ahead, 2026 and beyond. Moving into 2026, the economic outlook remains a blend of cautious optimism and persistent concern. Some indicators suggest inflation may moderate, offering potential relief for consumers. However, long-standing structural issues like unemployment, which remains high, limited wage growth, and inequality continue to threaten household finances. Many families have adapted by taking on side jobs, cutting non-essential spending, or tapping into savings, strategies that help but may not be sustainable long-term. For countless South Africans, the question going into 2026 isn't just economic statistics. It's whether the day-to-day reality of putting food on the table, paying rent, and covering utilities will become significantly easier or continue to erode living standards. Thanks for watching. Kindly comment your thoughts.